Welcome, everyone, to what we call Amazing Stories. Today we're going to talk about medieval convents and what life was like inside them. Have you ever wondered what really happened behind the walls of medieval monasteries? At first glance, these places seem like temples of serenity and discipline, silence, prayer, and contemplation. But behind the thick stone walls, built to shield the soul from the sins of the outside world, secrets were hidden that were never recorded in official documents. This is a story of desire, contradiction, and humanity in the most unexpected places. A story that reminds us that even in the holiest corners, human nature always finds a way to show itself. Today, I invite you on a deep journey through time and mystery to uncover the secrets of nuns and monks who, far from being just symbols of virtue, were also complex human beings with dreams, frustrations, and forbidden desires. Most people imagine monks and nuns living in extreme abstinence, far removed from any earthly pleasure. Prayers at fixed hours, long periods of meditation, strict fasting, celibacy, and silence. A regimen designed to tame the body and elevate the spirit. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. Imagine the cold, solemn stone buildings, inner gardens tended with devotion, choirs in the chapel resonating with sacred chants, and silent hallways where the echo of a single step seemed almost like an interruption to the divine order. But if we cross those doors, if we live alongside those who inhabited those places, we discover that, like in any closed environment, the internal reality is very different from the image projected to the outside world. The monastic routine, far from being uniform, was full of nuances. Not everyone was a saint, not everyone was faithful, and not everyone wanted to be there. Some young people were sent by their families without any calling, forced by political or economic interests, or to protect the family's honor. Others did seek a life of spiritual retreat, but found that extreme repression did not always lead to inner peace. And so, the contradictions between doctrine and daily practice piled up like echoes within the stone walls. One of the main tasks inside the monasteries was copying books. In times when the printing press didn't exist, the monks were the guardians of knowledge. Sitting for hours, day after day, they transcribed manuscripts with extreme care, but also with boredom. Imagine a young monk spending his days under the dim light of a candle, copying the sacred texts word for word with no room for error. A noble task, yes, but an exhausting one. Boredom and the desire for personal expression led many to fill the margins of the texts with illustrations. Some were small works of art, fantastic animals, dancing figures, scenes from everyday life exaggerated to the point of absurdity. Others, on the other hand, were clearly subversive, satires of the clergy, symbols of desire, creatures that were half human and half beast. These seemingly innocent drawings became a secret language, a silent escape, filled with emotion and sometimes protest. Through them, the scribes expressed their repressed personalities, their humor, and in some cases, their frustration with the hypocrisy of monastic life. Today, historians and paleographers study them with fascination. Were they mocking the system, or were they simply daydreaming while their hands followed their duties and their minds drifted far from the imposed rules? Monastic life was designed to avoid temptation, but it was precisely that isolation, that constant repression, which created the perfect environment for the very impulses they tried to eradicate to emerge. Monks and nuns lived in separate environments, but that didn't stop them from meeting each other. In mixed or neighboring monasteries, casual encounters would happen that, over time, became intentional. A glance exchanged in the garden, a few words shared during a joint mass, a chance meeting while delivering supplies, desire, a natural and uncontrollable force, always found a way through the cracks. Sometimes it showed itself through hidden letters, other times through furtive glances, and often it ended in nighttime meetings in the dark corners of the cloisters. Secret loves, forbidden but deeply human. Some of these relationships even led to internal scandals. There are records of monks who were expelled or reassigned after relationships with sisters from nearby convents were discovered, but there are also stories of complicity where the superiors, aware of these connections, preferred not to intervene directly in order to avoid greater conflicts or to keep from questioning the authority of the community. In certain extreme cases, pregnant nuns were sent to retreat houses where unwanted pregnancies were hidden. The children were often secretly given to allied families or, in the worst cases, abandoned. All of this was done under a pact of silence that was never to be broken. Scandal was the real sin that had to be avoided. During the day, the monks and nuns followed strict routines marked by moderation. Meals were frugal, hard bread, some cheese, fruit when available, vegetables from the garden. In some cases, a light soup accompanied the day. Meat, as a general rule, was forbidden except for the sick or on very special occasions. Fasting was considered a virtue, a discipline for the body and a sacrifice for the soul. But when night fell, a different story began. In many monasteries, after the final prayers, when silence was supposed to reign, secret gatherings would take place. In distant cellars or rooms with restricted access, small groups would meet to share much more generous meals. Freshly baked bread would appear, cured meats, sweets made with honey, and above all, wine and beer. Yes, beer was not only tolerated, but in many monasteries it was brewed with such mastery that they became benchmarks. The monks developed secret recipes, passed down from generation to generation. Some of those formulas survive to this day in Trappist abbeys. During these nighttime gatherings, people spoke in hushed tones, shared stories from the day with laughter, confided frustrations and doubts, and sometimes discussed ideas they didn't dare to voice in the light of day. The wine loosened tongues, hierarchical barriers faded away, and for a moment, everyone was simply men or women living a cloistered life that needed small outlets for release. In some accounts, these evenings ended with bawdy songs, discreet dancing, or even impromptu games. Tensions would dissipate, but it was also fertile ground for excesses to arise. There are stories of cases where alcohol consumption led to arguments, unexpected confessions, or decisions that people later tried to erase from memory. During holidays like Christmas or Easter, these celebrations took on an even more uninhibited tone. It wasn't uncommon for expensive fish, seafood, or even full-blown banquets to be allowed under the pretext of honoring Christ. In some convents, there are records of extraordinary purchases made right before these dates: barrels of wine, expensive spices, imported meat. And even though everything seemed the same the next day, the monastery walls knew the truth. Because while the day was for prayer, the night, in many cases, became a space where humanity showed itself without filters. Some monks, after these gatherings, would confess with guilt. Others simply saw it as a necessary break to help them maintain discipline for the rest of the week. For them, it was an unwritten balance, a truce between the divine and the worldly. And so, in the heart of those supposedly austere spaces, prayer and pleasure coexisted, dogma and laughter, public obedience and secret transgression. Because even in places dedicated to holiness, the need to share, to enjoy, to feel alive, could never be completely suppressed. Nuns, just like monks, were not immune to human contradictions. Even though they were expected to lead lives of chastity, obedience, and silence, the reality in many convents was much more complex. Behind the white veil and the devout smile, there were hidden stories of rebellion, desire, and the search for freedom. In some convents, the nights were more than just moments of reflection. There are documented cases where, as dawn approached, certain windows would discreetly light up with the flickering glow of a candle. This seemingly insignificant sign had a clear meaning for those in the know. It was a silent invitation, a code for visitors willing to break the rules imposed by the church. those encounters were not always sporadic. In many cases, these were planned meetings, coordinated through messages hidden between the pages of books or discreetly embroidered into clothing. There is talk of secret tunnels that connected the convent walls to the outside, especially in places with little supervision or where the abbess's authority was more flexible or even complicit. These encounters were not just physical, they were emotional as well. Many nuns found in these men an escape valve from the relentless routine of convent life. Sometimes they were former lovers, other times strangers who promised stories and affection that they couldn't find in religious life. There are also records mentioning the use of perfumes, homemade cosmetics, and hidden garments for these encounters. The preparation was meticulous. Every detail mattered. Makeup, though forbidden, was recreated with herbs and natural oils. The desire to feel beautiful, to attract, to live a different kind of night, was stronger than the threat of punishment. In the morning, everything returned to normal. Prayers, chants, discipline. But the echo of those muffled laughs, of those conversations under the moon, lingered in the walls like a secret shared between the stones and the silenced hearts. For many of these women, the convent was not a spiritual choice, but a social imposition. They were forced to give up their lives, their passions, their futures. Some had been sent there as children, without the right to choose, others exiled for not fitting what their family or community expected of them. In this context, those encounters were not just acts of rebellion, they were expressions of emotional survival. They were, in their own way, acts of resistance against a system that sought to shape human will under the pretext of faith. In the strictest convents, these practices were harshly persecuted. Nuns who were caught were severely punished, confinement, exorcisms, and even expulsion. But even so, history shows that these acts continued in the shadows like small flames burning in the darkness of dogma. And so, beneath the apparent serenity of the convents, another reality pulsed, a reality of restrained desire, of hidden passions, of women who, despite their vows, remained human. In the medieval world, where appearances were everything and morality was enforced with an iron fist, spaces as enigmatic as they were dark emerged, the Magdalene houses. Supposedly founded with a noble purpose, these institutions took in women considered deviant, repentant, or in moral danger. The official idea was that they would serve as places of purification, where these women could redeem themselves from their sins and return to the path of virtue. But the reality was far from that ideal. In many regions of Europe, the Magdalene houses were actually covert prisons, disguised as religious institutions. Women who had been discovered in improper situations were sent there, from relationships outside of marriage to unwanted pregnancies, or even simply for having been victims of abuse. The system did not forgive, did not ask questions, it only punished. Once inside, these women were subjected to a harsh regime, exhausting workdays, mandatory silence, physical and psychological punishments. Talking about the past was not allowed, nor was questioning authority. Repentance had to be shown through absolute submission. In many cases, the inmates lost their identity. They were no longer daughters, sisters, or citizens. They were only sinners seeking divine forgiveness. Within those cold walls, the days passed with endless prayers, sewing work, and household chores that served the institution more than rehabilitation. The supervisors, often religious figures, wielded absolute power, and there were many cases where that authority was abused. However, the Magdalene houses also became a refuge for those who had nowhere else to go, prostitutes who wanted to leave the streets, women marginalized by their families, young pregnant women without a husband. For many, that confinement was the only option for survival, even if it meant sacrificing their freedom. In some cases, groups of women inside these houses formed quiet support networks. They shared small gestures of solidarity, a hidden piece of bread, a comforting word, a timely touch. They were the subtle resistance of those who, even while being punished, refused to give in completely. And in the darkness of those nights, amid the creaking of cots and the echo of stifled cries, stories of love were also born, unexpected affection between inmates who became each other's support. The church, of course, never spoke of that. The official records only mention penance and redemption, but on the margins, where history refuses to disappear, those muted voices can still be heard. The paradox of the Magdalene houses was clear. They claimed to be places of compassion, but operated under the principle of punishment. They wanted to restore purity, but often ended up perpetuating pain. And while some women managed to leave and rebuild their lives, many others remained there until they grew old, forgotten by the very society that had condemned them. Today, ruins and forgotten archives are the last witnesses to those silent walls. And by remembering these stories, we are not just recalling the past. We are also questioning the structures that, even today, seek to control women's bodies, behavior, and dignity under the guise of morality. Religious festivities, especially Christmas, gave monasteries and convents a different atmosphere. Officially, these were times of spiritual celebration, of reflection and renewal of faith. Chapels were decorated with humble pine branches, extra candles were lit, and sacred hymns were recited with greater fervor. But beneath that surface of devotion, some of the most significant transgressions of the monastic calendar were hidden. During those special dates, when the daily routine was disrupted and supervision was relaxed, unique opportunities arose for those who wished to break the rules. In certain European monasteries, secret tunnels were discovered, passageways that connected the religious compounds with palaces, nearby homes, or even discreet taverns. These structures were not built by chance. They were cleverly planned routes, designed to allow people to come and go without being detected by church authorities. An Italian convent from the 10th and 11th centuries, for example, revealed in modern excavations a tunnel system that connected the nuns' rooms with the residence of a local noble family. Documents found alongside remains of jars, cups, and clothing suggested well-organized nighttime encounters. During these clandestine gatherings, the bread and wine blessed by the liturgy became symbols of another kind of communion, the communion of bodies seeking warmth, understanding, or simply distraction. In other regions, Christmas was used as an opportunity to organize secret banquets within the monastery itself. In basements or secluded rooms, lavish meals were prepared with ingredients that were normally forbidden: roasted meat, spiced sweets, and liqueurs fermented with wild berries. Some of these delicacies were brought in by outside merchants who knew exactly whom to bribe to get past the walls without arousing suspicion. And while prayers echoed in the main chapel, in the shadows there were true scenes of profane festivity, nuns and monks laughing, toasting, and even dancing to the rhythm of rustic instruments, improvising parties that defied the sober image by which the outside world knew them. But it wasn't all about pleasure and transgression. In many of these gatherings, deeper longings were also shared: letters, poems written in secret, personal objects exchanged as symbols of connection. It was Christmas, yes, but it was also the only time when many allowed themselves to truly be who they were. It's worth noting that not all the superiors were unaware of these practices. Some tolerated them with resignation, seeing them as a necessary catharsis to keep the peace for the rest of the year. Others simply preferred not to know. In those cases, complicit silence was the real currency of exchange. Over the centuries, rumors about these forbidden celebrations spread among curious believers. Stories told in hushed voices, embellished with fantastic details, fueled legends that still survive today in villages near old monasteries. Stories that were rarely confirmed, but that everyone suspected were true. Because if these stories teach us anything, it's that Christmas, even within the most sacred walls, was also a reminder of our shared humanity, of desires that not even the strictest dogma could completely suppress, and that beneath the cloak of faith, there often lay a vibrant web of emotions, choices, and secrets. Amid the strict order imposed by ecclesiastical rules, the quietest form of resistance also flourished, that of knowledge. In some convents, especially those farther from the major urban centers, small groups of alternative thought emerged, of forbidden study and of curiosity that could not be contained by the boundaries of doctrine. These women would gather quietly at night, with candles shielded from the wind and blankets wrapped around them to ward off the chill of the stone. They shared readings, discussed theories, translated ancient texts, and above all, shared a common passion, the desire to understand the world beyond dogma. They did not seek to directly oppose faith, but rather to expand it, to complement it with ancestral wisdom that in other times had been revered, not condemned. During Christmas, these gatherings became something special. They exchanged small symbolic gifts, bottles of essences, dried medicinal plants, recipes written in fine calligraphy, or alchemical symbols embroidered on fabric. It was a form of resistance, yes, but also a way to celebrate a freer, more intimate spirituality, where the search for truth was not limited by fear of punishment. Some nuns kept personal diaries where they recorded their thoughts, emotions, and discoveries. These writings, hidden in wall cavities or buried in wooden chests, have been discovered centuries later, revealing a network of women who, amid silence and apparent obedience, kept the flame of critical thinking alive. This resistance was not always peaceful. On more than one occasion, when these spaces were discovered, the consequences were severe: book burnings, expulsions, and even accusations of witchcraft. But the seed had already been planted, and even though many documents were destroyed, the ideas kept traveling, from convent to convent, from generation to generation. These nuns were not only defying authority, they were defying oblivion. In a world where they tried to impose a single truth, these women showed that knowledge, like desire, always finds a crack to slip through, and that even in the most repressed places, human curiosity is capable of opening invisible doors to inner freedom. Because to resist is not always to shout. Sometimes, to resist is to read a forbidden text by candlelight. It is to learn, to share, and to preserve. And in those stone and silent monasteries, there were many who chose that path without applause, without recognition, but with a courage that, centuries later, still echoes among the hidden pages of history. And this is how we end our amazing story for today. What did you think? Do you think these ideas are still practiced today? Leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for being with us, and see you next time for another amazing story.